Hilchos Erchin Vacharamin Perek Chamishi, the laws of the vows of value and dedication vows, chapter 5. We're going to begin the chapter by finishing the topic we started yesterday. Somebody who has a field in his family for generations, it's called a Sdei Achuza, an ancestral field, and he makes it holy to the temple. And then we're going to move on from there to laws that are related to consecrating other parts of your property, especially animals. A lot of talk today about animals. If a person makes his animal holy, all the different scenarios of when the animal becomes holy and needs to be brought as a sacrifice, when it becomes holy and just needs to be converted into value, which is donated to the temple maintenance fund, that's what we're going to be focused on today. So the Rambam begins, Hamakdish Sdei Achuzasai. When somebody consecrates an ancestral field, his father passed away, passed on to him the piece of real estate. So yesterday we learned that originally, when the Jews lived in Israel, and Yovel was still being observed, every 50 years was the Jubilee year, so the way it used to work was like this. If during the 50 years, anytime until Yovel, somebody redeemed the field, bought it back from the temple treasury, either the owner himself or his relative or a stranger, then good. And by Yovel, it would go either back to the owner if he redeemed it, or to the Kohanim if somebody else redeemed it or if nobody redeemed it. But those two options only existed in the times when Yovel was observed. Later on, even before the temple was destroyed, Yovel stopped being observed because most of the Jews were not living in Israel. They began to be exiled. And at that point, because you don't have the Yovel, so you don't have the option of the field going to the Kohanim, because Yovel is never going to be observed. So therefore, the Rambam is going to tell us there's an extra mitzvah to buy it back from the temple treasury. While Yovel was being observed, since there was always the option that somebody else was going to redeem it or the Kohanim would get it, so the owner doesn't have to redeem it. But because the Yovel is no longer being observed, there's a special mitzvah for the owner to redeem it. That's basically the first halacha. So let's see it inside. Hamakdish Sdei Achuzasai. If somebody consecrates his family field, his ancestral field, mitzvah alav livdeisahu. Ideally, the mitzvah is he should redeem it, he should buy it back. Sheha'adin kaidem. Because the owner of the field comes first. As we saw yesterday, when the owner of the field buys it back from the temple treasury, he actually pays an extra fifth. So hekdesh, the temple treasury, actually gains. So therefore the mitzvah is his first. But because there's always another option for the Kohanim to take the field, if the owner doesn't want to redeem the field, ein koifin, we don't force him. When do we say that? At the time when the mitzvah of Yovel was still observed, was still in force. Because even if the owner will not redeem the field, and Yovel is going to come with nobody redeemed it, it's going to go to the Kohanim, as we explained yesterday. But in the time when the Yovel was cancelled, it stopped being observed, under the first temple era, which means it's not going to the Kohanim, someone's going to have to redeem it, either the owner or somebody else. So then, we actually force the owner of the field to put in the first offer, to open the auction. And it's going to be redeemed according to its worth, like any other consecrated object. The laws we learned yesterday, where the Torah sets the amount, the value of the field for every square of 274 by 274 cubits, that value is over. After the Yovel stopped being observed, we assess its market value, and that's how we start redeeming it. Once the original owner puts out the first bid, the first offer, if there's somebody who comes along and wants to add to that number to redeem it, yigal, let him redeem it. If not, we told the original owner, you got it, he must give what he promised. Even though we assess the market value, and ideally, of course, we want the hekdesh to be able to sell the field at its market value, but if the opening offer is lower than that, it's okay. But it cannot be lower than 4 prutas, 4 copper coins. So that the fifth, which the owner will add, which is really a quarter of the principal, will be an actual pruta, which is the minimum amount of significantly financial amount in the Torah. Halacha beis, ratza ha'adain, if the owner of the field, he wanted to buy back his field, but to do that, what he wanted to do was limkar sades acheres misadaisav oililvais. He wants to sell other fields that he owns, or to borrow money, take a loan from somebody, in order to redeem this field which he consecrated, he has the option. Whether or not yovel is being observed, the owner has first rights, even if it means he's taking out a loan in a different way. He comes first before everybody. Also, if he wants to redeem half of it, he can redeem it. Yesterday we learned you can't pay for the field in installments, but you could pay for just half the field. You want to redeem half, pay half the sum. Which we actually don't find when a person sells a field to an ordinary person. We're going to see in the end of the 7th book, the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. Over there, we don't say this option of buying it back for half. You got to buy it back fully. This is actually a stringency in regular sale than to a hekdesh sale. Hekdesh sale you can redeem back half by half. Regular person you cannot. And now we segue into the new topic of the chapter, consecrating other elements of a person's property. Hamakdish as beisai, oyas behema tmea shaloi, oyshar mitaltalov. A person consecrates his home, an impure animal, a non-kosher animal, or any movable property, a watch. What's hekdesh going to do with a donkey? There's nothing that it can do on the altar. It can't be sacrificed. What are they going to do with a house? What are they going to do with movable property? Says the Rambam, the halacha is that when a person consecrates an object to the temple, you appraise them, you find out their worth, bein toivu bein ra, whether it's good or bad, get the quality, and it goes into the temple treasury storehouse. If the person who consecrated wants to buy it back, or his wife, or his heir, they should add a fifth, like any other consecrated object. And here too, we also force the owner to give the first offer. And all the money goes to the temple upkeep maintenance fund. And this home which the person consecrates, whether it's what's called a home in a walled city, or it's a home in an open area, it can be bought back forever. The Rambam here is alluding to a whole set of laws, which we're going to see in the end of the next book, where the Torah differentiates between what's called houses in a walled city, houses in an open area. Houses in a walled city, if you sell them, typically, you have a year to buy it back. If you don't buy it back in the year, it becomes the buyer's forever. Houses in an open area, it's the opposite. You have to leave it by the buyer for at least 2 years. Afterwards, you can buy it back. Here the Rambam says, that's only when it comes to interpersonal sales. But when you have given it to Hekdesh, to the temple treasury, doesn't matter what kind of house you gave the Hekdesh. Whether it's a house in the city, walled city, or in an open city, you can buy it back forever. Halacha dalid ga'olei acher miyad hekdesh. But once somebody else redeems it from the Hekdesh, from the temple treasury, so now the regular laws apply. If it was a house in a walled city, and it stays in the hands of the buyer for 12 months, the redeemer for 12 months, nechlat, it becomes totally his. If it was a house in a regular area, and Yovel arrives and it's still in the hand of the original redeemer, it goes back to the original owners at Yovel time. In other words, while it's in the temple treasury's possession, these laws don't apply. The owner can buy it back always. Once it leaves the temple treasury's possession, it reverts back to its regular laws, which is 12 months for the houses in the walled city, and you have until Yovel for the houses in the regular city. Halacha hey hamakdish behema tehoira temima lebedek habayis. A person has a fully kosher animal. It's unblemished, which means technically it can be brought as a korban, as a sacrifice. This guy, he says, you know what? No, I don't want to bring a sacrifice with the animal. I want this animal to go towards bedek habayis, the temple upkeep maintenance fund. Afal pisha avar alaseh. Even though we're going to see in a moment, you actually transgress a positive commandment. You cannot do that. If you have an animal which can be brought as a sacrifice, you have to bring it as a sacrifice. The only way to make it holy is to go to the Mizbeach. You chose not to, so you transgressed. Nevertheless, Masha asa asui v'chala kedusha aleha. What you've done is done, and holiness has landed upon the animal. The animal is holy insofar as temple upkeep maintenance is concerned. V'nifdes kishi tamima, and you must redeem it, buy it back, as it's unblemished. Let the kohen appraise its worth, and the money that you pay for it will go to the upkeep, temple maintenance. However, whoever buys it back needs to buy it back with the intention of doing the right thing with it, which is to bring it as a sacrifice, to whatever it could be brought. Shakol davar haroy lamizbeach eino yoytze midei mizbeach la'ilam. Any animal which could have been fit to the mizbeach cannot leave the mizbeach's authority. So even though the original guy consecrated it in the wrong way, whoever redeems it should redeem it with the intent of bringing it as a sacrifice. How do we indeed know that it's forbidden to consecrate an animal which is unblemished just to be used for temple maintenance? Says the Rambam Shenemar because it says, this is a verse which talks about blemished animals. Animals that have a physical defect and cannot be brought as a sacrifice. Says the pasuk, Shenemar v'shor v'seh, sorua v'kolut. An animal, an ox or a sheep, sorua. Sorua means one of its limbs are larger than the other. So one hand is disproportionately bigger than the other hand. One leg bigger than the other leg. One eye bigger than the other eye. Kolut means a hoof that wasn't split. Typically a kosher animal is supposed to have split hoofs. Say a cow was born, it's all one big hoof, not split. These are, So these are examples of animals that have a mum, that have a blemish. So the pasuk says, Nidava tase oisai. It means the animal that has a blemish. You should make a donation to the temple upkeep maintenance fund. We learn from tradition, from Moshe Rabbeinu. And this means that an animal with a mum, with a blemish, you can donate to the temple maintenance. And actually that's how the verse looks. That the animal can only become holy insofar as its value is concerned. Because you cannot bring a blemished animal to the mizbeach. And now the verse says it. Only it, an animal with a blemish, you can make a donation to the temple maintenance fund. And you cannot make an unblemished animal donation to temple maintenance fund. Whenever the Torah couches a negative concept in a positive term, when you infer a negative commandment from a positive commandment, it has the status of a positive commandment. In other words, here, what do we have? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, don't bring an unblemished animal as a bedek habayis. What does it say? It says you should bring the blemished animals as a donation, which implies unblemished don't bring. When you have only an implication, it has the status of an asay, of a positive commandment. A person consecrates his animal with no definition. He didn't say if it's going to go to the mizbeach or it's going to go to the temple maintenance fund. Or he's one day feeling super generous, maybe he's moving town, he goes, you know what, all my property is holy to Hashem. So what do? Do you use it for the maintenance or do you use it for the mizbeach? So the Rambam says, based on the rule that we said before, that anything which is fit for the mizbeach must go to the mizbeach, so the court, Rayin, will check. And they're going to see, Kol behema tmima haru'uya lahakriv al gabi hamizbeach, any unblemished animal in his possession which really could be used as a korban, as a sacrifice to the mizbeach, so you bring it to the mizbeach. Zecharim yimachru letzarchei oilos v'yakrivu oisan oilos. Let the male animals be sold towards a fund that gives for burnt offerings and be brought as burnt offerings. And the females will be sold for peace offerings and brought with the money peace offerings. And the money will go to the temple maintenance fund. In other words, we're going to kind of make a mix over here. We're not going to let the animals go directly to the temple maintenance fund because the animals can go to the mizbeach. So we're going to sell them towards proceeds that are going to lead to sacrifices, but the money itself will go to the temple maintenance fund. Why? Because when a person makes an undefined consecration, it goes to the maintenance fund. About this it says in the Torah, here's the verse, if a person consecrates his property, and there's an animal which can be used to brought as a sacrifice to Hashem, whatever can be given to Hashem from that should be holy to the Mizbeach, which means, means to say, whatever is fitting to brought as a sacrifice to the Mizbeach should be brought. Over here you said it undefined. Okay, sell it, and with the money, bring sacrifices. But the point is, make sure this animal leads to a sacrifice being brought. A person consecrates his property. And here we see the power of AI. I put into the AI prompter, I said, give me bottles of wine, oil, a sack of flour, and birds on the table. And then Mamish created this. Look at this. This is incredible. This is probably exactly what it looked like. This guy, he has a whole storage house. He's got wine, he's got oil, he's got flour, he's got birds. Okay? Now, all these things, these are all fit to go on the Mizbeach. Because first of all, birds could be a sacrifice. Every sacrifice was accompanied with wine and oil and flour. So these are all things which could go to the Mizbeach.
By the way, any birds?
No. Special birds, you're right. It has to be pigeons or turtle doves. Torim or b'nei onah.
That's pictured.
Huh? Yeah. So the Rambam says, what does the Rambam say over here? Similar concept. Since it's fit to the Mizbeach, so we need to make sure that they get to the Mizbeach. However, since you didn't say it's for the Mizbeach, so we can't bring it directly. So what do we do? Sell these objects and buy with them the same type of object and bring those on the Mizbeach. And the money should be used to buy actual male animals and brought as burnt offerings. Now, one second. We just said in the last halacha that you should that you should bring the original things for bedek habayis, for temple maintenance fund. How come over here the money is being used for burnt offerings? Says the Rambam, why should the money of these be brought as burnt offerings with dmei behema tamima yipul bedek habayis? And the money for the unblemished animal should go to the temple maintenance fund. I think I made a little mistake. I misspoke before. When I said to sell the animals to be brought as burnt offerings, you're actually supposed to sell those animals to people who need them. And they will actually bring it as a carbon. And the money goes to the temple maintenance fund. Here also, you sell the wine and the flour and the oil to people who actually need it and let them bring it on the Mizbeach. The money is used for burnt offerings. So why? So the Rambam says, when you have an animal that was consecrated to the Mizbeach, an animal could end up not being used by the Mizbeach. There's going to be a whole section of laws in the Rambam's 8th book. If you have an animal that was made holy for a sacrifice, and then it gets a big blemish, so you can't bring it in the Mizbeach, what do? You redeem it. Kamoshi Yizbar, as will be explained later in this chapter and later in the Rambam himself. However, the stuff in this picture, flour and wine and oil and birds, if they become disqualified, ein lahen pidyon, they have no way to be redeemed. Shenamar, because it says in the verse which talks about redeeming blemished animals, you stand up the animal in front of the Kohen and he evaluates it and then you can redeem it. Which tells us, anything which could be stood up and appraised, like an animal, can be redeemed. And whatever doesn't have the ability to be stood up and appraised cannot be redeemed. Therefore, in this case, the money needs to go towards actual burnt offerings. Halacha Yud Hikdish Nechasav Stam. A person consecrates his property completely, undefined. And among the property, you found ketores, incense. Which incense? Shenoisnin la'umnin bischaran ad shayachzeru v'yikchu oisa kamesha bi'arnu bishkalim. The umnin is craftsmen, artisans. The ketores that was given to the artisans as their wages until they can be bought back with new temple funds, as we explained in the laws of the half shekel coin. What is Rambam referring to here? The Rambam is referring to the fact that the ketores, the incense, was made in yearly quantities. There was always some left over from the powder that was created for the incense. The problem is, not the problem, but the halacha is that every Rosh Chodesh Nisan, tomorrow, this is the new month of Nisan, every new month of Nisan, all communal sacrifices had to be brought from the new funds that were brought by the Jewish people, half shekel coins every year. You can't use old funds. So what do you do if you have extra ketores, extra incense? How do you make sure you're going to use it from the new funds? So what they would do is, they would actually use the leftover ketores to pay the people who made the ketores. That was their wages. Then they would transfer the holiness of the incense to money. And then with the new funds, they would buy it back from the artisans. And this way the ketores was considered to be from the new year. So let's say one of these artisans who had the ketores in his possession makes all his property hektish. So what do you do with that ketores? It cannot be used for anything else. So the Rambam says, just do a replay. Do the same thing that you do with leftover ketairos. Take that incense, use it as payment for one of the artisans who's making the ketairos, and then buy it back from the new funds. The same thing you should do if you find in his possession one of the spices that was used in the ingredients for the recipe of the incense. Have it used as payment, and then buy it back from temple money, and now it's holy. A person consecrates a regular, kosher, unblemished animal to the mizbeach as a sacrifice. And unfortunately, it gets a blemish, and now it cannot be brought to the mizbeach. It has to be appraised and then redeemed. About this it says, in the other verse we saw before, if you have an impure animal which cannot be brought as a sacrifice to Hashem, stand up the animal in front of the kohen and he appraises it. Now here the Torah uses the word behema tmeya, which usually refers to a non-kosher animal. But the sages interpreted this as a tradition, and this is referring to a kosher animal which cannot be brought on the mizbeach. It has a mum. Once you redeem it from the temple treasury, use the money to bring another sacrifice like it. Yud Beis, anybody who consecrates an animal in its lifetime, bein tahira, bein tamea, whether it's kosher or non-kosher, bein kosher by the kabayis, bein kosher mizbeach, whether it was given to the temple maintenance fund to the altar, shenafal behem mum, and they got a mum. Or it was a regular animal that could be brought as a korban, as will be explained, or some texts have kemosha be'arnu, as we just explained. Either way, whenever you make an animal holy, it must be appraised in court. It says again, you stand up the animal in front of the kohen. Therefore, if the animal, any animal that it was, died before it had a chance to be appraised by the kohen and redeemed, we never redeem it after its death, we simply bury it. But if you initially consecrated it after it was dead, slaughtered or a dead carcass, it's considered like any other movable property, and you can redeem it from Hekdesh's hands. You have an animal that you slaughtered both of the windpipe, the pipes, the windpipe and the food pipe, or most of the two pipes, and it's still convulsing. It's considered to be alive. It can still be appraised. It's included in the umbrella of being able to be stood up and appraised until it actually dies. If somebody takes a kosher animal, a cow, and he says, I want it to be holy, not its body, its value to be holy. Doesn't matter. Its body becomes holy. What would that look like? A person says, the money of this cow is going to be going to the temple treasury as a sacrifice on the altar. Hi atzma tikrav. Too bad. The cow itself has to be brought in the mizbeach. Hikdish echad me'ivareha ledama. But if you only consecrated one of the limbs to use its money for the mizbeach, the Amar, and you said dmei ragla shel parazu hekdesh lemizbeach, the money of the foot of this cow is going to be holy to the temple, to the altar. Harizu safek in pashta kedusha bekula oilei pashta. Now there's a doubt if the holiness should extend to the whole animal or not. Therefore, we rule stringently and we say you bring it as a sacrifice and it shall not be redeemed. Now, obviously, it cannot be fully sacrificed because we don't know if it's fully holy, and you can't bring unholy sacrifices into the temple. So what do? You sell it all to somebody else who needs to bring a sacrifice anyways. And the money that he pays you, divided in half. All the money should be considered regular money, besides for the worth of that limb. Now, if the limb that he's talking about was actually an integral limb, then of course the holiness extends to everything. But if it's just the foot, not integral, then you do this trick. Sell it to a guy who needs it, and then the money that he gives you, except for that limb, will remain unholy, and that limb's money will become holy. If the animal which you consecrated was to begin with blemished, it anyways couldn't go to the mizbeach. When you consecrated one of its limbs for its money to be used to the temple, whether it's integral or not integral, only the money of that limb became holy. Because anyway, it can be brought as a korban in the mizbeach. Ketzad, what would that mean? A person says, the money, the worth of the animal's foot or the animal's heart. Doesn't matter. Heart is integral, foot is not integral. Either way, since the animal has a blemish and he makes it hekdesh to the mizbeach, hu behekdesh shutfin ba. You and Temple Treasury become partners in it. We literally go half-half. If somebody says, the head of this servant or the heart of this donkey, holy to the mizbeach. Now, of course, not a servant or a donkey can be brought as a sacrifice. Or a person says, my head is consecrated to the mizbeach. Of course, your head is not going to the mizbeach. You're only obligated to pay the money, the worth of your head. You see on the market how much would the organ be worth if it was sold, and you bring a sacrifice with the money. So all the commentaries ask, what do you mean? How could you evaluate a person with a head or without a head? His head is everything. There's no such thing as a person being worth less or more. If he has no head, he's not worth anything. So the answer the commentaries give is we're talking about a person who we see what's the difference between a person who does work that doesn't require so much intellect or does require intellect. In other words, you have a guy who's doing very manual physical labor, so his head, in other words, his intellectual capacities aren't so important for this work. What if a person is a scientist and he needs all of his head, to do all his math? So then,
that's basically
that's how you appraise it.
Court today, between when you have to pay somebody for not working.
Right. So you see what kind of potential job he could have had.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the kind of halacha we're talking about over here. Says the Rambam, when do we say this? If you were trying to make these things holy to the altar for a korban, which obviously you can't do. But if we're talking about sacrifices that were meant to be brought, or consecrations to the temple maintenance fund, if somebody says, I want to donate the head or the liver of this donkey or the slave, since we're talking about integral limbs, now you have to give the full value. Anytime you consecrate to the temple maintenance fund, you are consecrating initially the value. So you never made the body holy to be converted into money. You made the money holy to begin with. And therefore, if it's an integral limb, it spreads to the entire thing, and you owe the full value. Halacha you test, the final halacha. A person kind of combines two types of vows. He says, I want to bring my erech, that's the Torah value that you have, right? The human Torah value, to the altar. I want to give my value as a sacrifice. Maybe be'erkei karban. So the basic law is, give that value, whatever your worth is, as a sacrifice. But what if you're poor and you can't pay the full value? So 2 days ago we saw Torah makes an exception for poor people. That you only have to pay whatever you have. The question is, does that law apply over here? Now we're going to be in doubt whether you should be judged with that special dispensation for poor people. The reason to say that you should be judged, and you should have that leniency, is because you use the word erech, Torah value. But the other side would be, maybe we shouldn't give you that license, since you made the vow to the altar. So too, similar doubt. A person takes his ancestral field, which we began the chapter today with, but instead of just a regular, hekdesh, he says, I'm bringing my field to the altar. So, harezu nifdes, of course it has to be redeemed, and the money is used for burnt offerings to the mizbeach. But the doubt is, do we follow this rule that we learned about yesterday? Where's my picture from yesterday? Oh, this one. There's a doubt in do we let the Torah special rule of deciding the market value that for every square area 50 silver coins, or do you redeem it at its regular worth? Since you said that you're going to do it to the mizbeach, not to a regular consecration. So the Rambam says we rule always stringently. Stringently means what the Talmud says, Yad hekdesh al ha'alyona. The hand of the temple treasury always has the upper hand. In doubt, you always give them the benefit of the doubt. So what do? You check what's more. If the value was more, then the donor has to pay the higher value. If the worth that the Torah sets is more, then the person pays that value. In other words, you always give whatever will bring hekdesh more money.